Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack some of the most catastrophic decisions in biblical history. We're going to dig into the psychological anatomy behind these choices and, look at the surprising redemptions that followed. One choice literally destroyed kingdoms, while another restored absolute hope. So let's just dive right in.
The source immediately sets up this really powerful tension. We're looking at historical figures known for their extraordinary faith, right? Yet they also made decisions so devastating that they collapsed entire nations. We're talking about massive leaders completely surrendering to pride, everyday people trading their faith for fear, and kings just flat out ignoring direct warnings.
But this brings us to the central mystery of the text. Because you see, these stories weren't just preserved to document human failure. They were actually recorded to answer a much more compelling question. What happens in the aftermath of our worst choices? And honestly, the aftermath might actually surprise you even more than the choices themselves.
So here is our roadmap. We'll look at the paradox of biblical heroes, rebellions and fallen kings, divided kingdoms in exile, and a disciple's darkest hour before finally unpacking the patterns of compromise and the triumph of mercy. Section 1. The paradox of biblical heroes. Our first historical case study brings us right to the foot of Mount Sinai, focusing on the newly freed Israelites. There's a fascinating psychological shift that happens here in the text. The Israelites had literally just witnessed massive miracles, like walking right through the parted Red Sea on dry ground. But when Moses delays on the mountain for just 40 days, panic sets in. They didn't just want leadership, they demanded visible certainty. Think about that. In mere weeks, they traded the God who freed them for a golden calf they built themselves. Yet even in this dark moment of immediate consequence, Moses intercedes, and a willingness to forgive is shown to those who repented. Section 2. Rebellions and fallen kings. Moving generations forward to Israel's greatest monarchs, the source illustrates how sweeping success offered absolutely no immunity to temptation. Let's look at the anatomy of this downfall. We are talking about King David here, the guy who famously defeated Goliath. But one evening, instead of being out at war, he stays home in Jerusalem, and a single, lingering glance at Bathsheba just completely spirals into adultery. Then, to hide it, the deception escalates step by step, ultimately culminating in the arranged murder of Uriah, one of his most loyal soldiers. The secret probably felt perfectly safe, until it wasn't. When finally confronted by the prophet Nathan, David genuinely confessed. But a super crucial point emerges here in the text. While his confession absolutely brought forgiveness, that mercy didn't just erase the consequences. The violence he initiated fractured his own household, leading to years of heartbreak. It's a pretty stark reminder that our choices often leave lasting effects, regardless of forgiveness. Now, a downfall doesn't always happen overnight. Actually, scratch that. With King Solomon, it's more like a slow, subtle drift. He started out with a divine grant of unmatched wisdom and unprecedented peace. But over the years, as he married many foreign wives who worshipped other deities, he gradually started allowing altars to idols to be built. The very king who dedicated the magnificent temple eventually tolerated the worship of false gods. So it wasn't a sudden crash at all. It was just a quiet, generational compromise. Section 3. Divided kingdoms and exile. And that subtle drift leads us perfectly into how Solomon's singular compromise triggered a devastating domino effect that long outlived him. Over the next several generations, leaders repeatedly ignored the warnings of prophets, guys like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Instead of turning back, the nation trusted military alliances over God, embraced injustice, and just fully committed to worshiping idols. This whole chain of decisions eventually culminated in the Babylonian Empire invading Jerusalem, destroying the temple, and taking thousands into exile. Everything they believed was totally secure just vanished. But then we hit this incredible number, 70. Because after 70 years of exile, the people actually returned to rebuild their home and restore their worship, meaning their greatest national disaster wasn't the end of the story. It actually became the exact catalyst for a profound spiritual reset. Section 4. A disciple's darkest hour. Now the source intimately zooms in, shifting from the macro collapse of an entire nation to the deeply personal failure of a single man, the Apostle Peter. On the night Jesus was arrested, Peter boldly claimed, "I will never abandon my Lord." But just mere hours later, warming himself by a courtyard fire, fear completely took over. He denied even knowing Jesus, not once, but 3 separate times. When the rooster crowed, the reality of his failure hit him, and he wept bitterly. I mean, many would assume a failure of this magnitude would just end his calling forever.
But failure didn't have the final word here. Later, on a beach in Galilee, Jesus didn't cast a grieving Peter aside. Instead, he asked for 3 affirmations of love, which is this direct, beautiful, healing mirror to Peter's 3 denials of fear. With every single yes, the disciple was restored. The very man who surrendered to fear went on to preach boldly to thousands.
Section 5. The Pattern of Compromise. Looking across all these historical case studies, a distinct anatomy of failure begins to emerge. There is a very clear rhythmic pattern here. Every single one of these dark decisions began with a small compromise. Impatience grew into idolatry for the Israelites. A lingering glance became adultery for David. Tolerance slowly morphed into apostasy for Solomon, and simple fear paralyzed Peter into outright denial. The absolute crucial takeaway from the text is that sin rarely appears all at once. It grows quietly from seemingly insignificant choices until the consequences become, well, impossible to ignore.
Section 6. The Triumph of Mercy. But alongside this pattern of compromise, the source highlights an equally persistent and much more hopeful pattern.
Throughout all of this history, God is shown relentlessly pursuing his people. He continually offered opportunities for repentance, he sent prophets before judgment fell, he confronted sinners with the truth to wake them up, and he welcomed anyone who humbled themselves. The underlying message, justice and mercy, can completely coexist, and failure simply did not have the final word. And you know, this psychological map is just as relevant for us today. The modern giants might look a little different, but the impulses, they are exactly the same. Pride still whispers that we know better than God. Fear still tempts us to remain silent when the truth really should be spoken. Success creates this dangerous illusion that we just don't need guidance anymore. And compromise continues to promise quick rewards while completely hiding the long-term costs. It's a fascinating reflection of human nature that spans thousands of years. Even though consequences like broken trust and lingering pain may remain long after a dark decision is made, a core thesis clearly emerges from all this. Redemption often begins where human hope seems to end. The source makes it clear that no mistake is documented as being too great for grace to redeem, provided the repentance is sincere. These darkest decisions weren't recorded to encourage despair, but to reveal how mercy can triumph over brokenness.
Which brings us to the ultimate challenge. After seeing all of this, will we repeat the blind spots of history, or will we actually recognize our own small compromises before they fracture our future?